Hi everyone, in this video I just want to show my winter sowing reveal. I'm gardening in Scarborough, Ontario, Canada, which is technically I believe a Zone 5B. So I put out my winter sowing containers in late January this year, and we had quite a lot of snow. We had about 3 feet of snow at one point, if not more. So these sat out all winter underneath the snow, and now I can show you the reveal for everything that I sowed. So winter sowing is basically the concept where you take a reused bottle. In this case I used a Tropicana orange juice bottle, and basically you cut it through the center. I used scissors for that. Poke drainage holes in the bottom, so I poked a bunch of drainage holes using scissors, and leave the cap off all winter so that moisture can get in. And then I planted seeds. In some of these containers I overseeded heavily, but typically it's best if you just put about 5 to 6 seeds per container of this size. Usually people use milk jugs, but in Canada for the most part we are using bagged milk, so I had to make use with orange juice bottles and collecting bottles from the recycling throughout last season in order to winter sow them this season. So here's a reveal of everything that I winter sowed. Peeled off the duct tape that I had holding it in place. This is clearly a lupin, and what I do is I put a label on the inside. So I use old yogurt containers and I just cut them to make labels. So this is the lupin, and you can see how nicely it's grown. So I find winter sowing best for flower seeds and vegetable seeds, as well as I've done alpine strawberries, for example. Usually those that are more cold tolerant, or they tell you to plant out in springtime, that's what I usually use winter sowing for. So to go through each one of my reveals, the first one, this is mixed yarrow. So you can see the seedlings here. Most of these obviously I have way overseeded, so I will have to be very careful teasing them out. This one, it's a little slower along. This is penstemon. I didn't have very good germination with penstemon inside, so I'm happy to see that there's some tiny seedlings here. For containers that have tiny seedlings like this, I'll probably just leave them in here and let them soak up a little bit more sun and put on a bit more size until I actually transplant them out into the garden. That way it just saves me the need to like mark where I put it in the garden and make sure that these tiny seedlings don't get disturbed. So in this one, this is straw flower. Not as good germination here. One thing I do want to note is that in the middle of winter, like December time or January, early January, when I was looking for potting soil, it was really hard to find in our Toronto, Ontario grocery stores, or big box stores really. Most of our nurseries are usually closed, or they just carry the small potting soil bags, which I don't think are economically worth it to purchase for winter sowing. So in this container, which is one of my most lush containers, this is Purple Prince Poppy. So I use a garden marker to label the containers, and I always label the outside, like on the plastic, and I also put a label on the inside. I didn't open this one properly, but this is basically all the poppies, and you can see all the roots developing at the bottom. This one, I believe these are coral bells. I didn't label it properly, and on some of them obviously I tried to use the regular Sharpie just because I couldn't find my garden marker, so you can see the difference between the labeling. But there are a few tiny little seedlings in there. This one is a dud, and you can see all the algae growth that has happened on top of it. This was scarlet poppy, so oh, there is actually a few little seedlings in there. I'll let it grow on a little bit, but I'm not too bothered about that. This one did a lot better. These are foxgloves. So these are the carousel foxgloves, I believe, and these are supposed to flower in the first year. So the foxgloves are biennial, meaning that usually they flower in the second year, but these ones are apparently a variety that's supposed to flower in the first year, so I'm excited for those. Moving a little forward. So in this one, what do I have here? So this is delphinium. I think I made quite a lot of containers of delphinium because I was super excited to see them last summer and discover them for the first time. So that's delphinium. This is some sort of kale, I believe. Oh, this is cabbage actually. So this is cabbage, so I'll get that into the garden right away. This one, which is way overseeded obviously, I believe these are tall snapdragons, so it's a mix of tall snapdragons, so you can see how well they did. Here's another dud container. So I think it depends on the potting soil that was used. I know it was, again, really hard to find good potting soil in the winter time. So this was Magic Fountain Delphinium. I think I might have another container of it. If not, I'm not too bothered about it. I have one container of delphinium that did fairly well. So this was an experiment that I did because I have these peanut butter jars and I didn't want to cut the peanut butter jar, so you're just able to unscrew the lid obviously. So I cut a hole in it and you can see that it did work. So in this is dwarf hollyhock growing. So there's the little dwarf hollyhock transpose. So to get these out will probably be a challenge. I'll probably have to cut down the side of the container to get it out, but it does work if you don't want to bother cutting through the plastic in the winter time. You can always use a container like this, poke a hole through it, and then it'll just be a little bit more challenging to get out, but I would probably just use like scissors or an X-Acto knife to go down the side of it to get it out. This is mint growing, so I have some mint growing already in the garden, obviously in containers because mint is quite invasive, I guess, in a way. It will spread really readily if you don't put it in containers. So this is exciting though, to see little baby mint transplants. Okay, this one, this is a purple peony poppy. So I have one big poppy and one little seedling happening in here. Poppies I find are hit and miss, like sometimes they'll grow really well. This is, for example, antique poppies. So these ones obviously have done a lot better. I think with poppies, the main thing is to make sure that the soil keeps moist throughout the winter. So I think in the back here it's a lot more dry than the front here, so that's where I have germination. Not sure. I do sprinkle out poppies in the winter just into the garden beds themselves, but I like having the assurance of making of the winter sowing. What else do I have? So this was an experiment of putting tomatoes. So these are sunrise, oh, can't see that, sunrise bumblebee tomatoes. So I have two little transplants in here. I do start some tomatoes indoors as well. I have just a little simple setup for grow lights, and I usually just keep that for tomatoes, eggplants, and peppers. Just a few of them to get started indoors, but you can see that it does work with winter sowing as well. I put, I think, like 3 seeds in here, so I'm happy to see that 2 of them have germinated. And for my experience with winter sowing of tomato seedlings, it actually, the transplants catch up quite quickly, so it's a pretty good way of starting tomatoes indoors if you don't have access to grow lights or a sunny window. This is another container of delphinium. So there's delphinium. This is another dud container, so I want to always show those as well. Clearly nothing has grown here. I think the soil just stayed too dry. What else do I have? Here's a container of Veronica. So Veronica has germinated, which is exciting. This is, I think, a purple Veronica. This is another dud container. This is Echinacea. This is my second year trying to winter sow Echinacea, and clearly it's not working. Maybe it's the seed packet that I have, but that's okay. And the last container of winter sowing I have is kale. So you can see that cold hardy vegetables typically do pretty well with winter sowing. Last thing I want to show about my winter sowing experiment is I do use or try to use different containers. So these I believe had some sort of kiwi, like Costco kiwis or something that we bought over the winter. So I'm just taking 2 of these and sticking them together, and it's easier to tape them around if you don't have bottles, for instance. So these are some lupins. I did try to space them out a little bit better than I did in the plastic container. So as you can see, there's 4 transplants there. And then you can also use these kind of like salad green containers from the winter. So in here, I think I just threw some carrot seeds, like leftover carrot seeds. So you can see that they have germinated. Usually carrot seeds I will put straight into the garden bed, but I did want to just see if it worked, and it clearly did. So that's my 2022 winter sowing grow bale. So depending on your container, it might be a little bit hotter to knock everything out, but if need be, these containers, for the most part, I use them for 1 season. Some of the bottles I actually try to use for 2 seasons now, and they do, like I was able to use them, but if it's really hard to get the seedlings out, you might as well just cut the plastic bottle. You can always take it back together if you really want to reuse it. So once I've gotten it out, all you have to do is kind of gently tease it apart, and then you have a nice transplant that can go into your garden. I just wanted to show what one of the roots from a winter sowing container can look like. So this is one of the lupin plants that I'm transplanting out into my little garden bed up front. And these are just examples of the poppy roots that I'm separating and planting out into the garden right now.